technically you should say till chapter 10, because you have finished chapter 9, right? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So, this morning we begin with chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita. Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And we will look at the first two shlokas, verses of the 10th chapter. No, it's just really small print. I will soon have to start wearing glasses like you. Sorry, I confiscated your copy. So, well, for the sake of time, I will just quickly read these two shlokas and Prabhupada's commentary. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Bhuya eva mahabao Shrinu me paramam vachaha Yateham priyamanaya Vakshyami hitakamyayam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Listen again, O mighty Arjuna. Because you are my dear friend, for your benefit I shall speak to you further, giving knowledge that is better than what I have already explained." Purport. The word Bhagavan is explained thus by Parashara Muni. One is full in 6 opulences, who has full strength, full fame, wealth, knowledge, beauty and renunciation, is Bhagavan, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. While Krishna was present on this earth, he displayed all 6 opulences. Therefore great sages like Parashara Muni have all accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now Krishna is instructing Arjuna in more confidential knowledge of his opulences and his work. Previously, beginning with the 7th chapter, the Lord has already explained his different energies and how they are acting. Now in this chapter he explains his specific opulences to Arjuna. In the previous chapter, he has clearly explained his different energies to establish devotion in firm conviction. Again, in this chapter, he tells Arjuna about his manifestations and various opulences. The more one hears about the Supreme God, the more one becomes fixed in devotional service. One should always hear about the Lord in the association of devotees. That will enhance one's devotional service. Discourses in the society of devotees can take place only among those who are really anxious to be in Krishna consciousness. Others cannot take part in such discourses. The Lord clearly tells Arjuna that because Arjuna is very dear to him, for his benefit such discourses are taking place. And now text 2. Name vidu suragana prabhavam namaharshayah aham adiri devanam maharshinam cha sarvashaha. Neither the hosts of demigods nor the great sages know my origin or opulences, for, in every respect, I am the source of the demigods and sages. Purport. As stated in the Brahma Samhita, Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord. No one's greater than him. He is the cause of all causes. Here it is also stated by the Lord personally that he is the cause of all the demigods and sages. Even the demigods and great sages cannot understand Krishna. They can understand neither his name nor his personality. So what is the position of the so-called scholars of this tiny planet? No one can understand why the Supreme God comes to earth as an ordinary human being and executes such wonderful, uncommon activities. One should know, then, that scholarship is not a qualification necessary to understand Krishna. Even the demigods and the great sages have tried to understand Krishna by their mental speculation, and they have failed to do so. In the Srimad Bhagavatam also it is clearly said that even the great demigods are not able to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They can speculate to the limits of their imperfect senses and can reach the opposite conclusion of impersonalism, of something not manifested by the three qualities of material nature. Or they can imagine something by mental speculation, but it is not possible to understand Krishna by such foolish speculation. Here the Lord indirectly says that if anyone wants to know the absolute truth, quote, "Here I am present as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I am the Supreme," end quote. One should know this. Although one cannot understand the inconceivable Lord who is personally present, He nonetheless exists. We can actually understand Krishna, who is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, simply by studying His words in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. The conception of God as some ruling power or as the impersonal Brahman can be reached by persons who are in the inferior energy of the Lord. But the personality of Godhead cannot be conceived unless one is in the transcendental position. Because most men cannot understand Krishna in his actual situation, out of His causeless mercy it descends to show favor to such speculators. Yet despite the Supreme Lord's uncommon activities, these speculators, due to contamination in the material energy, still think that the impersonal Brahman is the Supreme. Only the devotees who are fully surrendered unto the Supreme Lord can understand, by the grace of the Supreme Personality, that He is Krishna. The devotees of the Lord do not bother about the impersonal Brahman conception of God. Their faith and devotion bring them to surrender immediately unto the Supreme Lord. Out of the causeless mercy of Krishna, they can understand Krishna. No one else can understand Him. So even great sages agree. What is Atma? What is the Supreme? It is He whom we have to worship. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukham Karati Vachalam Pangum Rangate Girim Yatkripatamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Vanchakalpatarabhashta Kripa Sindhuvevacha Paridanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So not to lose the continuity, I will read just the two translations, even without Sanskritam, just English. The Supreme Personality of God had said, "Listen again, O mighty armed Arjuna. Because you are my dear friend, for your benefit I shall speak to you further, giving knowledge that is better than what I have already explained. Neither the host of demigods nor the great sages know my origin or opulences, for in every respect I am the source of the demigods and sages." Okay. By the way, Bhagavad Gita is not merely sentimentally most important book to ever come out of India, so to speak, if we were to think of Bhagavad Gita in historic terms. But it has become most important work, religious, spiritual, philosophical work, for the reasons of the arguments that are given by Krishna in the book. And so, one picture we get from the Bhagavad Gita that Atma is different from Bhuta. Atma is the soul, and Bhuta is the combination of the soul and the body. So within this combination of the soul and the body, is what we call the living entity that has come into the physical world and now experiences himself or herself, actually soul is gender neutral, experiences himself as a physical being while still having spiritual needs. So, but the important thing about this is that the souls are souls everywhere. And therefore, if we were to study nature of humans in any part of the world, we would learn so much about humans everywhere in the world. If humans in any part of the world think they're special, they're wrong. They're very much the same. So throughout history, humans have been making same mistakes. Wherever you go. So, for example, Krishna makes one claim here, right? Name vidu suragana. In other words, the suras, Prabhupada translates demigods. The higher pious living beings do not know me. And then he also says, Aham adir hidevanam, that I'm the source of gods. Krishna makes this claim. Now, if we look, for example, this is something that humans have been wrestling with since time immemorial. If we, for example, look at Middle Eastern traditions, namely Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, we will find that they have been struggling with the same thing since the beginning. And those who don't believe me can read the Bible. I've studied the book, so I grew up in a Christian tradition, so I have great authority here on the topic. What we find there is we find problems with polytheism. And polytheism is literally understanding that there is no one supreme entity, but that there are rather multiple gods. And these gods compete. And so in the Middle East, in this part of the world, we have the same picture, problems of polytheism. What it is, namely, that these gods are fighting, and then occasionally they even kill each other. And they're very often born, and they live for some time, and then they die. Some of them are considered to be eternal, but still, nevertheless, some are sometimes stronger than other ones, and sometimes weaker than other ones. And they're competing like this. If we go to Europe, way before Christians, like 1,000 or 2,000 years before Christianity and Islam or Judaism came about, we find Greeks and Romans, and they struggled with the very same thing. What we find in those times, again, same problem of polytheism, inconsistencies. What are these inconsistencies? That we have these gods, and these gods are again fighting amongst each other, and not sometimes being in agreement and sometimes being in disagreement. And so sometimes you find, for example, in Greek mythology or Greek history, whatever you want to call it, you find that sometimes one god would favor looking, gods from above would be looking at humans below. And the humans below would be, let's say, fighting in a war. And so one god would decide, I will help this person. And another god would say, no, I will help that person. What's happening right now? And they would arbitrarily choose. Arbitrarily choose means they would choose a warrior to favor, not on any moral quality of that person. So the Bible begins, Old Testament, real Bible, begins with this concept that God has chosen a tribe for no good reason as His own tribe, and all other tribes should be killed. This, I'm just saying what the book says. I disagree with this, but in other words, there is no real moral quality. There is no objective value to one person over the other, but it's simply an arbitrary choice. And very often, whichever person worshipped a god better, therefore that god will favor him. But if this is true, this would, first of all, this would make it clear that these entities might be powerful, but they're not supreme. They're not supreme and they're not pure. They're not pure because imagine, this is something like bribing in the material world. If you want to have a favor of a politician, and in India probably this is how things go largely, you just give the person some money or do some favor and then you receive favor in return. Is this just? No, it's not just. This is actually evil. But however, if we actually look at what scriptures teach, they don't teach this. They don't say that gods are, because in Hinduism, in Vedic tradition, we do find gods, many gods. But we don't find this kind of picture of gods. This kind of picture of gods is actually what they call popular opinion of what gods are. Rather, what we find scripture teaching is that there is, first of all, there is one supreme God. And that there are many gods under the supreme God. And if naturally, if you worship these gods, you will gain some favor. Just if Prabhu and his wife have been very nice to me, so therefore I naturally feel that I should be extra kind to them. But when it comes to moral decisions, like let me win a war, or let me increase my salary, or let me dominate some other people, these are the decisions that gods cannot make. Because if they made these decisions simply on the basis that you have offered them some incense or money or food, then that would make them evil. So, ultimately, okay, if we just can pause this for 1 minute, and I will then explain something which will, once we understand, will help us understand Krishna's statements in this section of the Bhagavad Gita. For example, in philosophy, there is something called moral reasoning. In other words, what is moral and what is immoral? How do we define? How do we decide what is moral? Are gay marriages moral or immoral? Is abortion moral or immoral? Is eating meat moral or immoral? Is using cars moral or immoral? Is it using plastic cups and plates good or bad? How do we decide?
Or drinking milk, is it moral?
Or correct. And so all these questions are good questions. But how do we make decisions? How do we decide what is actually good and what is actually bad? What is moral and what is immoral? And so he may have his opinion and I may have my opinion. But all that is just his opinion, and my opinion is ultimately my opinion. In other words, if there is something, you see, in order to understand whether something is truly good, even the claim that ultimately something is good and something is bad must necessitate that something ultimately in the universe is always as it is and it never changes. For example, equation. Like if I tell you x minus y equals z, solve the problem. How can you cannot solve the problem because you don't know x, you don't know y, and then you don't know z. So much more has to be given. So this is God. And when I say God, I don't refer to devas. I refer to Deva. I refer to Adi Deva. I refer to God, to ultimate supreme personality of Godhead, as Krishna says, the source of devas. Ultimate God. So ultimate God is the measure of everything. And it is a philosophical necessity to have not gods, but to have one God. In Hinduism, in Vedic tradition, we have many gods, but we also have Supreme God, who is above all gods. Why? Because if that wasn't the case, we would simply have a whole lot of people simply offering their opinion and ultimately fighting, as we find throughout human history. Throughout history of human concept of religiosity, like with Greeks, you have all these gods fighting, like literally fighting. Who's right, who's wrong? Sometimes they stand on the side of one warrior and others on the side of the other warrior. And then there is conflict. Just as a conflict between the warriors, there's conflict between gods. Who is right? Same thing you find in the Bible. In the beginning, in this part of the world, you have this concept that every tribe has their own God. And so then the question is raised, who is God? You claim that that's God, and they claim that they have their own God. And another tribe says they have their own God. So who is God? And they all differ in opinion. So therefore it is a philosophical necessity to have one ultimate opinion, to have one ultimate standard. And so the definition of Bhagavad Gita is that God, unlike gods, is the source of everything. Not only that material world comes from God, not only that moral values come from God, but also demigods or gods themselves come from God. In other words, the source of everything is God. For example, if you I know traditionally in India people don't do that, but you have all lived in America long enough, so you may understand. Okay, here's a good example. Everyone in India knows this, but I don't. But anyhow, I know a little bit about it. Cricket, right? That's a big time sport in India, right? Cricket games. Especially I was in India once when India and Pakistan were playing. Everyone were talking about it. So, if we were to think of a cricket game, and so in the cricket game there's a person who tosses a ball and there's a person who hits it. And so, a person throws a ball and a person hits it. And depending how the person hits it, the game goes good or the game goes bad for one or the other party, right? Is that good or bad? It makes no sense. It makes only sense if you decide to play the game. In other words, these things have value only if you decide to play the game. So similarly, this world, this life, our life, makes sense only because God made this game and we're now playing it. So when a person was thinking, someone came up with this game of cricket, someone speculated out this game and came up with these rules. And because that person has come up with those rules, therefore whoever plays that game plays by the rules, and according to the rules of game, certain things are good, certain things are bad. For certain things you get a point, for certain things you don't get a point. And for certain things you get expelled. So similarly, because God has created this game called life, therefore certain things are good, certain things are bad. For certain things you get rewarded, for certain things you get punished. For certain things you get happiness, and for certain things you get pain. Therefore it is a necessity. It is a necessity to have one God, ultimately one supreme God. And this is what Bhagavad Gita teaches. And actually Bhagavad Gita teaches this all throughout. Oh, there's a card. Okay, all right. Where am I? I'm getting lost here.
10.3.
Yeah. I was looking for this is all covered in just first two verses, right? And therefore when Krishna here says, Aham Adir Hidevanam, this is very, very important. This is very important. Why is this important? Because unless we understand this, we ultimately cannot be pious. Even if we try to be pious, we cannot be pious. And if we are pious without knowing Krishna, that might be just by accident. So in other words, in order to be good, in order to be pious, one has to understand God, the Supreme God, and understand His teachings. In this way, one can... Oh, it's already 11:20. Otherwise, one is simply drifting as Bengalis say, Mano Dharma. Just whatever hits the mind, right? Speculating a lot. And so, it is for these reasons that this is considered supreme knowledge. It is considered supreme knowledge. Now, point number 2. What Krishna is stating here, first verse is introduction, and then the second verse is really beginning the teaching. And so, what Krishna teaches in the second verse, so first it says that He is the origin. He is the Supreme God. And then it says that because He is the Supreme, therefore means everyone and everything came from Him. Therefore, everyone and everything cannot know Him. So what shall we do now? Close the book and go home because we cannot know God? No, that is not the point. Krishna is actually teaching Arjuna here about himself. In other words, there is scope of knowing God. But there is a specific methodology to knowing God. In other words, unless one practices that methodology, one will not come to know God. And so when Krishna here says, you cannot know me because I'm the source of you, means you cannot know me without my help. There are different ways of learning about things. And one way of learning about things is a very popular method in the modern world. And that is the method of control experiment. This is a modern, actually, how many of you have read or maybe at least heard of Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion book? No? Okay. Very good, you didn't miss much. He's a big-time atheist and very aggressive. But in his book, he quotes another atheist who says that religion trembles in the way of modern science. And this is true for religious people who don't know Krishna, who don't know Supreme Personality of Godhead, and who don't know His teachings. So, they practice, when they learn about the world, they practice this methodology, namely controlled experiment. So what's a controlled experiment? Controlled experiment is a way of learning about the world by controlling a thing. You place a thing in a controlled environment, and then you subject the thing to different tests. And how the thing responds to these tests, you get to learn about it. So water, you take a little bit of water, put it in a jar, and then you close the jar, and then you look at it, and you see, okay, it is transparent. You touch it, okay, it is wet. You you put a piece of paper in it, and then you notice, okay, the water expands things. So paper, when it absorbs water, it expands.